Stories of ships stuffed with treasure from an era long ago rarely live up to the hype.
Today, we're going to be talking about the Seawise Giant. This thing was absolutely massive, like mind-bogglingly huge. It was the biggest ship ever built, a floating city of steel that could carry enough oil to fuel a small country. It was basically the king of the seas, a total engineering marvel. You'd think something that big would be invincible, right? Wrong. Despite being this incredible feat of human engineering, the Seawise Giant had its fair share of issues. There were problems everywhere, from safety concerns that would make your hair curl to financial headaches that would give anyone a migraine. And in this video, we're going to explore all the ups and downs, the triumphs and disasters that made this ship one of the most legendary and problematic vessels ever to hit the water. The Seawise Giant's legacy. The construction of the Seawise Giant started in 1974, and it was completed in 1979. It was a really big ship, an ultra-large crude carrier, or ULCC for short. The folks who built it, Sumitomo Heavy Industries, or SHI for short, had a shipyard in Oppama, Japan, and that's where they made the ship. For a long time, nobody gave the ship a name, so they just called it number 1016. When they tested it out at sea, the ship exhibited severe vibration problems while going astern. Because of this, the owner didn't want it, so there was a big argument about it. Finally, they settled things and the vessel was sold and named Oppama by SHI. The shipyard exercised its right to sell the ship, so they made a deal with this guy named C.Y. Tung. Now, Tung wanted to make the ship even bigger, so they stretched it out and added a bunch of space for stuff. A couple of years later, it was ready, and they called it the Seawise Giant. They used Seawise for a few of their ships, kind of like a nickname. After they made it bigger, the ship could carry a crazy amount of stuff, 564,763 tons. It was super long and really tall, so tall in fact that it couldn't fit under some bridges. Can you imagine a ship that big? It had a rudder as heavy as 230 tons and a propeller that weighed 50 tons. This alone made it the longest ship ever constructed. It is longer than the famous Empire State Building, surpassing its length by about 50 feet. It is also one of the heaviest ships ever built. By conservative estimations, the ship should be able to carry over 4,000 times the weight of the Statue of Liberty. The ship's deck was huge. Reporters said it was big enough to fit 5 football fields. That's like a whole neighborhood of boats. Even the parts were giants. The propeller weighed about 50 tons, and the rudder was a whopping 230 tons. That's heavier than 50 African elephants put together. Because of its crazy size, this boat needed a ton of space to stop or turn around. It took almost 6 miles to come to a complete stop, and if it wanted to do a U-turn, it needed about 2 miles of open water. That's about as long as a nice leisurely walk around New York's Central Park. While the Seawise is the longest ship ever made, it isn't the largest. The Seawise Giant was an absolute titan of the seas. Stretching an incredible 1,504 feet in length, this behemoth was longer than many of the world's tallest buildings. In fact, it even surpassed the iconic Petronas Towers in Kuala Lumpur, which stand at 1,483 feet. But let's set the record straight. Being the longest ship in the world doesn't necessarily mean it's the biggest in every category. In terms of gross tonnage, the Seawise Giant wasn't at the top of the heap. It ranked 6th, trailing behind some heavyweights like the Pioneering Spirit, a colossal crane ship, and the Batillas class of supertankers. Where the Seawise Giant truly reigned supreme was in its cargo capacity. This ship was a masterclass in transporting massive amounts of goods. It held the crown for the longest and heaviest ship in terms of its carrying capacity, with a staggering maximum load of 564,763 tons. To put that into perspective, that's an astronomical amount of cargo and solidified its place in maritime history as an unparalleled giant of the shipping world. The problems of immense size. You know how they say, big things come in big packages? Well, the Seawise Giant was the ultimate gift-wrapped problem. This thing was absolutely massive, so big in fact that it couldn't even handle a shallow bath. With the ship fully loaded, its bottom sat about 81 feet underwater. That meant forget about using those skinny little waterways where most of the oil traveled. It was a real sight to behold, this massive floating city. But running something that big came with its own set of headaches. Mostly it was just too clumsy and thirsty for fuel. It was like trying to drive a bus through a narrow alleyway while also trying to keep up with a race car's gas mileage. Not ideal, right? So, while it was a groundbreaking ship, it taught us a lot about what not to do when building supersized boats. Back in the chaotic 1980s, this giant found itself smack in the middle of the Iran-Iraq war. Things got intense when Iraqi forces targeted the ship with bombs, inflicting serious damage. But here's the kicker. The Seawise Giant was built like a tank, refusing to sink despite the heavy blows. However, the damage was so extensive that repairing it would have cost more than buying a brand new ship. Can you believe that? Yet the ship's story didn't end there. It got a makeover and a new name, the Jare Viking. Fast forward to 2004, and the ship, now known as the Jare Viking, had retired from its days of transporting crude oil. Instead, it found a new purpose as a floating storage and offloading unit in Qatar. For a couple of years, it served this new role, until it was eventually sold to an Indian organization. But they didn't plan on using it for its intended purpose. Instead, they bought it for scrapping. Given the ship's colossal size, dismantling it took almost a year. Despite the numerous challenges and changes, the Seawise Giant remains a legend, celebrated for its extraordinary size and technological prowess. One of its anchors, weighing a staggering 36 tons, was carefully preserved and now resides at the Hong Kong Maritime Museum. It stands as a testament to the ship's impressive legacy, drawing tourists and maritime enthusiasts alike who come to marvel at this piece of nautical history. Flaws and design issues. So, what were the flaws of the Seawise Giant, and what were the reasons behind them? Let's explore some of the answers together. Issues of design and construction. The Seawise Giant was completed in 1979. The project started in 1974 by Sumitomo Heavy Industries in Yokosuka, Kanagawa, Japan. It was most likely the largest ship ever built, but it had a few construction problems. First up, the ship's structural integrity. You see, when you build something as massive as the Seawise Giant, you're bound to run into a few hiccups. For this giant, the hiccups were more like earthquakes. The ship's immense size caused significant vibrations during travel. Imagine being on a ship so long that it started to shimmy and shake as it cut through the waves. These vibrations were no small shakes. They were strong enough to almost throw a wrench in the ship's basic operations. The problem was particularly noticeable during certain procedures or when specific parts of the ship were in action. To keep the ship from shaking itself apart, several modifications were made over its lifetime. These included major changes to the propulsion systems and tweaking operational procedures to keep things smooth sailing. Next, let's talk about welding defects. Reports suggest that the Seawise Giant had quite a few welding issues. Now you might think, welding? How big of a deal can that be? Well, when you're dealing with a ship this size, subpar welding can cause a lot of headaches. Poor welding techniques led to multiple defects, which meant the ship had to undergo numerous repairs throughout its life. These issues didn't just pop up once or twice, they were a recurring theme that seriously impacted the ship's efficiency and reliability. If the welding had been done right the first time, the Seawise Giant's story might have been a lot smoother. As the years went on, the Seawise Giant faced more and more issues. By the last phase of its life, it had shifted roles. No longer the mighty transporter of resources, the ship had become a floating hub for storing and offloading goods. This change was necessary because the structural and welding problems had taken their toll, making it less reliable for active duty on the high seas. That's not all, though. So, what other challenges did this massive ship face during its lifetime? Stay tuned, because the saga of the Seawise Giant is far from over. Issues of maneuverability and fuel efficiency. It also had quite the reputation for its maneuverability, or lack thereof. This floating colossus wasn't just big, it was the biggest ever built, holding the title of the longest ship in history. Picture this, a vessel so lengthy it took a whole 2 kilometers just to make a simple U-turn. In clear weather, mind you. Imagine trying to parallel park that thing. Navigating this giant through tight spaces was a logistical nightmare. The Seawise Giant was practically allergic to busy ports and congested channels. Its enormous turning radius meant it needed a ton of space to maneuver, which isn't exactly abundant in bustling maritime hotspots. The crew often had to steer clear of these areas to avoid the risk of colliding with other ships. Nobody wanted a titanic traffic jam on the high seas, after all. This avoidance strategy came with its own set of headaches. Dodging busy routes meant the Seawise Giant had to rely on smaller vessels to shuttle its cargo to and from ports. This logistical ballet increased both the time and the cost of transporting goods. It was like ordering takeout and then having to send a fleet of scooters to fetch it from a restaurant 2 towns over. But the fun didn't stop there. The sheer size and weight of the Seawise Giant also meant it responded to steering commands with all the enthusiasm of a sloth on a Sunday afternoon. Quick, nimble movements? Not on this ship's watch. In situations where fast reactions were crucial to avoid obstacles or other vessels, the Seawise Giant's slow response time was a serious concern. Imagine trying to dodge a pothole on a bicycle, but you're riding a cement mixer instead. The size and design of the ship also caused problems with fuel efficiency and speed. First up, the ship's speed was, well, not exactly zipping along. Its top speed was around 16.5 knots, assuming the weather was playing nice. Now, while that might sound impressive if you're talking about your average ship, it was a bit sluggish compared to the more streamlined modern tankers that were around during its time. The Seawise Giant's hull wasn't really built with speed in mind. Instead, it had a design that prioritized size over sleekness, which meant it faced quite a bit of water resistance. Think of it like trying to sprint through a pool instead of a clear path. All that drag meant that the ship burned through fuel faster than a sports car guzzles gas. The fuel consumption was particularly problematic because the Seawise Giant was often on long-haul trips, which is a bit ironic given its inefficiency. The ship's bulkier design meant that every journey came with a hefty price tag. Higher fuel usage meant higher operational costs, which kind of defeated the purpose of having such a massive vessel in the first place. Now let's talk about the ship's draft, which is the depth of the ship below the waterline when it's loaded. This was another tricky factor. The Seawise Giant had a pretty deep draft, which limited its ability to navigate certain ports and waterways. So, even if the water was deep enough to float the ship, the channels and ports needed to be big enough to accommodate it. In many cases, this wasn't the case. Special operations and adjustments had to be made just to get the ship to its destination, which added extra costs and complexity to its operations. And if you thought the deep draft was a problem, the Seawise Giant's sheer size also caused issues at ports. Not every port was equipped to handle such a mammoth vessel. In many cases, smaller auxiliary ships were needed to ferry goods from the Seawise Giant to the shore. Even ports that could handle the big guy had to make significant adjustments to ensure it could dock and be unloaded safely. Navigating through certain channels like the Suez and Panama canals was particularly challenging due to the ship's size and draft. These logistical headaches not only increased costs, but also made the ship less efficient overall. And let's not forget the environmental concerns. With such a massive vessel, there were always worries about potential pollution or accidents. If something went wrong, the consequences could be severe, potentially wreaking havoc on marine ecosystems and creating huge challenges for the ports that could accommodate the Seawise Giant. Issues of human safety and environmental hazards. While structural issues, fuel efficiency, and maneuverability problems were significant, there were plenty of other headaches lurking beneath the surface. Let's start with safety. The Seawise Giant wasn't just a giant in name, its massive size meant that safety was a constant concern. Structural integrity was a big deal. Imagine trying to keep a ship that's longer than 3 football fields in one piece while dealing with the stresses of the open sea. The ship's enormous scale made it susceptible to mechanical stresses, leading to cracks and wear and tear issues. These problems weren't just minor annoyances, they could compromise the ship's hull and other critical components, creating serious safety risks for the crew. Then there's corrosion. The Seawise Giant had a lot of surface area exposed to seawater, which meant corrosion was an ever-present issue. The hull took the brunt of it, constantly battling against the relentless water resistance of every voyage. If left unchecked, this corrosion could have led to major structural failures. Regular maintenance was crucial, but keeping up with it was no small task for a ship of that size. On top of that, the Seawise Giant primarily carried crude oil, which is notoriously flammable. Any spillage or leakage was a major fire hazard. Picture a massive fire on a ship that's already challenging to maneuver. Containing such a blaze would be a nightmare. The ship's enormous size meant that reaching critical areas to control a fire or perform an evacuation could be slow and cumbersome. If a fire broke out, the response time would be hampered by the ship's length and the distance between various critical points. Evacuating the crew would be another challenge. With crew members scattered across such a vast vessel, getting everyone off quickly in an emergency was no easy feat. This posed a serious danger, especially if the ship faced threats like the attack by the Iraqi Air Force in 1986. When it comes to keeping a ship as massive as the Seawise Giant safe, ensuring that every part of the vessel had working safety equipment was a monumental task. Imagine trying to make sure that lifeboats, life vests, and fire extinguishers are not only in place but also fully operational throughout such an enormous ship. It's not like you can just toss these items in a few key spots and call it a day. Every nook and cranny of the Seawise Giant had to be equipped and maintained, which was no small feat given its vast size. The crew also faced issues related to the ship's rather unique design. The sheer scale of the Seawise Giant meant it had some significant blind spots. Navigating through busy or narrow waterways with limited visibility was risky business. Collisions with other ships or obstacles were a constant concern, and maneuvering such a massive vessel through tight spots required an extra level of vigilance and skill. Weather was another adversary. The ship's enormous surface area made it particularly vulnerable to adverse conditions. During storms, the Seawise Giant's sheer weight and size made it challenging to handle. High winds and rough seas could turn a routine voyage into a precarious situation, increasing the risk of accidents considerably. Then, of course, there were environmental concerns. The potential for an oil spill was a major worry. With the Seawise Giant carrying such vast amounts of crude oil, any spill would have been catastrophic, not only for marine life, but also for coastal ecosystems. Beyond spills, the ship's heavy fuel consumption meant it left a significant carbon footprint. The exhaust gases from such a massive vessel contributed to air pollution, adding another layer to the environmental impact. Issues of finance and economy. Aside from the previously mentioned problems, there were other significant issues. What other problems could have plagued the Seawise Giant? Were they manageable, or did they require urgent adjustments to the ship? Let's find out. Operating the Seawise Giant was a financial roller coaster, to say the least. Let's start with the basics. Running this behemoth of a ship wasn't cheap. Its size alone meant it guzzled fuel like nobody's business, making it the priciest vessel to operate on the planet. This wasn't just a little bit more expensive, it was a whole new level of cost compared to smaller, more fuel-efficient ships. The Seawise Giant, being the largest tanker in the world, had an enormous appetite for fuel. As oil prices surged at the turn of the 21st century, the economic viability of such a colossal ship became increasingly questionable. The larger ships were suddenly not as in demand, and the high fuel consumption of the Seawise Giant made its operational costs soar. But that's not all. The Seawise Giant's massive size also meant it couldn't dock at most ports. This created a logistical headache. To get cargo from the giant tanker to the port, smaller ships had to be used, adding layers of complexity and extra costs. Specialized ports were required just to accommodate its size, and even these had to make special adjustments to handle the giant. Docking fees and the expense of transferring cargo became a significant burden, and let's not forget the ship's ownership saga. Throughout its life, the Seawise Giant changed hands multiple times, each new owner grappling with the financial strain of operating such a massive vessel. Each owner tried to cut costs and find ways to make the ship financially viable, but many eventually threw in the towel. overwhelmed by the persistent challenges. Ironically, the last owners figured out that the most cost-effective way to handle the Seawise Giant was to repurpose it as a stationary storage unit. It turns out that stationary use, without the need for constant operation and maintenance, was the most efficient way to make use of this colossal ship. Repairing the Seawise Giant was no small feat, and it didn't come cheap. One of the most dramatic episodes in its history was when Iraqi aircraft dropped bombs on the massive tanker, causing devastating fires that seemed almost impossible to control. Despite the heroic efforts to put out the flames, the damage was extensive. Repair estimates for the Seawise Giant ended up being more than the ship's selling price, which led to it being declared a constructive total loss. In other words, the cost to fix it was so high that it was considered beyond repair economically. But, in a twist of fate, the Seawise Giant wasn't done yet. Remarkably, it was salvaged, repaired, and returned to service. This process didn't come cheap. Repairing the ship actually ended up costing more than it originally did to buy it. It's a bit like pouring more money into fixing up an old car than it would take to buy a new one, but on a colossal scale. When its operational days finally came to an end, the Seawise Giant was sold to an Indian company for scrapping. At this point, keeping the giant ship in operation was no longer economically viable due to the high costs involved in maintaining and running it. The process of dismantling the Seawise Giant was a major undertaking. It took almost a year and required a sizable workforce to bring the ship to its final end. Ironically, even dismantling the Seawise Giant was a costly affair, proving that dealing with this maritime giant's life cycle was as expensive as its operation. Adjustments made to the Seawise Giant. When dealing with the Seawise Giant, the challenges were no joke. Despite its impressive engineering feats, the ship came with a hefty price tag, not just in terms of dollars, but in the sheer scale of problems it faced. Its construction was a marvel, but it was clear from the start that managing and maintaining such a colossal vessel would be a Herculean task. So, what sort of tweaks and changes were needed? How did these adjustments impact the ship's operations? Did they make a difference in the grand scheme of things? Let's dive into this maritime saga together. Back in the early 1980s, the ship caught the eye of wealthy businessman C.Y. Tung, who decided to take the Seawise Giant to the next level. He added an astonishing 100,000 tons of cargo capacity to this already massive titan through a process known as jumboization. For those who haven't come across this term before, jumboization involves slicing the ship in half and inserting a whole new section to extend its length. It's a pretty wild concept and has been used on various tankers and cruise ships. However, it requires a special kind of shipyard where the magic happens, and let's just say, it doesn't come without its share of headaches. The Seawise Giant's issues were compounded by its cargo, especially during the tense and turbulent times of the 1980s. The Iran-Iraq War brought a whole new set of challenges when Iraqi aircraft targeted the vessel. The bombs that hit the ship created massive explosions and fires that were only made worse by the crude oil it was carrying. This situation was a nightmare for the crew and everyone involved. When Norman International took over the ship, it was clear that the damage was extensive and the vessel needed major repairs. Many parts of the ship had been damaged beyond repair, making the road ahead even more complicated. As time went on, the Seawise Giant, which had been rebranded as the Jari Viking, went through a series of significant changes. In 2004, it was repurposed into a floating storage and offloading unit, a major shift from its original role. So, what prompted this dramatic transformation? Well, in the early 2000s, the landscape of the oil industry was shifting rapidly. The demand for gigantic tankers like the Seawise Giant was on the decline. The industry was leaning more towards smaller, more agile ships that could dock at a wider range of ports. These nimble vessels were better suited to the changing needs of the market, which meant that the massive size of the Seawise Giant was becoming a liability rather than an asset. On top of that, managing such a colossal ship on the move was a costly affair. The expenses for fuel, maintenance, and crew welfare were sky high. It was becoming increasingly clear that it was no longer economically viable to operate the ship as a standard moving vessel. By converting it into a stationary unit, the costs were greatly reduced. The ship's new role involved staying put, which meant it no longer had to burn through fuel or deal with the ongoing expenses associated with a fully operational tanker. Another major factor was the sheer size and weight of the ship. The Seawise Giant was so massive that it couldn't dock at many important ports. This limited its operational flexibility and made it difficult to use effectively in a rapidly changing industry. The decision was made to retire it from active service as a moving vessel, and instead, it was repurposed to serve as a stationary platform for storing and offloading resources to smaller ships. Converting the Seawise Giant into a floating storage and offloading unit turned out to be a game-changer in many ways. This transformation allowed the ship to thrive in offshore oil fields, where its enormous size became a major advantage. Instead of being a cumbersome giant, it now served as a massive storage tank, accommodating vast quantities of crude oil and making the offloading process to smaller tankers much more efficient. The need for frequent interruptions in transportation was minimized, streamlining operations and maximizing productivity. This conversion also significantly extended the ship's lifespan. By shifting from an active seafaring vessel to a stationary unit, the strain of constant ocean travel was eliminated. This adaptation meant that the ship could continue playing a vital role in the oil industry without the wear and tear associated with maneuvering through rough seas. The modifications made to the ship were designed to enhance its efficiency and align with the current needs of the industry. The conversion involved installing specialized systems and structural reinforcements commonly found in offshore vessels. These upgrades were essential for ensuring the ship could operate effectively while stationary. Additionally, onboard facilities were revamped to suit its new role. Despite these improvements, the financial sustainability of keeping the Seawise Giant in operation was still in question. In 2010, the decision was made to sell the Seawise Giant for scrapping. Its parts were dismantled and recycled, marking the end of an era for this legendary vessel. The ship's components were repurposed for more efficient uses, giving new life to the materials that had once made the Seawise Giant a marvel of maritime engineering. So, what do you think? Was it the right move to retire the Seawise Giant, or were there other options worth exploring? Share your thoughts in the comments below. If you enjoyed this deep dive, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe. Also, if you want to see more fascinating stories and facts, be sure to subscribe to our channel. See you in the next video.